Just to make sure that we're all aware of this topic that we're tackling here, this is how to actually reduce negative implicit bias in your advertising. It's no small feat. And as we were putting this together, I was reminded of some early conversations in the neuromarketing space that I found really unfortunate. I remember there were some leaders that were kind of dodging the ethics question around neuromarketing and saying, well, hey, we're using these techniques to sell toothpaste or toothbrushes or, consumer packaged goods, those decisions that are relatively trivial. But we're not using it to make the decisions that really matter, like elections or, those kinds of, those heady, more weighty, perhaps more important decisions. I remember cringing at that because if a measure is better at understanding people's emotions and what they will do, we should use it for all decisions that matter. And what you're going to see here today, I start that way because the opposite is now true. Because if we want to eliminate implicit bias in our advertising, we can't simply rely on conscious questions, somebody's opinion about whether an ad is biased or stereotyped or stereotyping. And we can't rely simply on conscious attitudes about whether their implicit attitudes towards a group of people have changed. What we really need in this moment are measures, true measures that capture the non-conscious change in the human mind. So we find ourselves as an industry and a niche within the insights industry in a really enviable position. We now are in a position where our measures are the ones that matter. There's no need to shy away from these. These are the measures that matter for this moment. And we like to think of this as the age of implicit research. For those of you who've been in the industry for a long time, implicit association testing. It was originally brought out of the lab and applied to brands and then to packages and concept testing. It has a lot of really good business applications. But what's so fascinating about how implicit research has come around is that we're now back full circle to where it began with the study of stereotypes and biases. Businesses are now interested in understanding not just the business impact of their marketing, but also the social impact of your marketing. And when you're looking to understand the impact of your marketing, you want to base your decisions on causal evidence, not casual opinions. So I'm sure that everybody can see me here, and I can't see those slides yet that I've been showing, but here you go. So the point here is, if you're making an important decision, you don't want to base that decision on someone's opinion. You ideally want to base it on evidence. And ideally, you want to base it on scientific evidence. That's true for evidence-based decision-making in general. It's also true for decision-making in marketing that's attempting to reduce implicit bias. Let's base it on scientific evidence, not casual opinions about whether an advertisement reinforces bias or not. Interestingly, there are at least 4 different ways in which your advertising can have a social influence. And there's nothing like a 2x2 to help bring everything into clarity. So imagine it this way. Your marketing, your advertising can have a social impact that can make people feel more positive or more inclusive towards other groups of people. That's a positive social outcome. But your advertising can also have a negative social outcome. Social impact. And that negative social impact may be unintentional, and that's your other axis here. What is the intention of your marketing? Are you actually trying to make a social impact as well as a business impact? Or are you unintentionally making a social impact? Your intentions on the marketing side for social impact can be unintentional or intentional. And we're going to show you in this talk case studies that fit each of these different criteria. For example, we're going to review Facebook Born in Quarantine, which has a positive business impact for Facebook, but also has a positive social outcome, making people less biased towards Black women after a single viewing of that ad. We're also going to review E-Trade's Buying on the Dips, which is an attempt to be inclusive, but is having an unintentional impact of negative social outcome. So this is one that's trying but is not working. And then finally, we want to go right at implicit bias with an intentional ad that's trying to tackle it, and one that also has a positive outcome on groups, perceptions of groups of people. You might be wondering the upper left-hand corner there, intentional advertising that has a negative social impact. Certainly there are people, organizations that want that, but we're not going to review that case study here. That's not the kind of social outcome that we're interested in promoting, but there are people who may be. So in tackling this question on implicit bias, we know that we have to understand both engagement and influence with an ad. This is just the basics of really good ad testing. But your engagement really needs to engage emotionally. Positive or negative emotion works for this, and it is a measure of breakthrough. What we're going to show you today is engagement as measured by facial action coding, the muscle movement in the face of viewers while they're watching ads. And in addition to engagement, because we all want to entertain, we want our content to be liked, but we need to make sure that we're influencing perceptions. And typically, this is a business outcome. Does it lift my brand? Does it change key brand attributes of my brand? But in this case, you'll also see one of our outcomes, the influences that we want to have, is positive social impact. So to do that, we're going to bring together two automated behavioral science technologies. And again, this is just one example. It's one example of things that we're doing here. But as you'll see, as we get to the end of this presentation, this is really the future of the insights industry. It's not simply automated research. We can't simply accelerate the delivery of inadequate insights to our audiences and expect to have a seat in the boardroom. It's automated behavioral science that is amassing scientific evidence in a rapid format that gets you causal change in attitudes towards your brand and towards social groups of people, and also tells you what the emotional experience is that's related to that change. So you're going to see the combination of these two technologies, but I want you to think of it as a trend in the industry. You'll see more and more of these popping up, cropping up in the coming months and in the coming years. So first, I can't tell you how happy I am to be able to present this. What better situation for a true implicit platform than a situation where you need to know whether your marketing actually truly reduces implicit bias. So Sentient Prime, if you're not familiar with this, this was pulled from the social psychology literature in the mid-90s to study stereotypes and biases. Because when you're asking people explicit questions about whether they're stereotypical or biased towards another group of people, you can't expect their conscious answers to reflect accurately, truly, what their biases are. Either they're not willing to tell you because they're embarrassed, or more perniciously, they're not able because they don't have conscious access to the biases that are influencing their behavior. So we and some of our friendly competitors pulled this out of the lab in the mid-2000s and put it into brand research. And in brand research, you can see over on the right-hand side, there's a prime that's occurring. And that prime, whether it's Snap or Twitter or Facebook, is automatically activating associations in your mind. And we're measuring how quickly you can make judgments on a separate objective task, that is whether emotions are positive or negative. And we're measuring the degree of cognitive dissonance that the prime introduces into your behavior. So your speed of response is slower if there's incongruity between the prime and the judgment that needs to be made, and it's faster if there is congruity. It's facilitated. Just to give you a sense of what this is measuring, it's essentially measuring neural network associations in the non-conscious mind. By priming and measuring response times, we're able to access and measure the strength of an association in the mind without relying on any explicit questions. This was the solve for early implicit researchers, and it's also the solve for the age of implicit research in market research. If we really want to understand what people are thinking and feeling without relying on what they say in a survey, we need these kinds of techniques to reveal that. Those automatic associations and the strength of those associations give rise to emotions. And emotions quantitatively influence our behavior, as you're going to see. So that's implicit association testing. That gives you influence. It gives you the outcome. You can measure change in your attitude towards your brand before and after exposure to an ad according to implicit bias. But you can also measure the emotional experience that got you there. That is, we're going to have causal evidence of change, but we're also going to have moment by moment data on the expression of the emotional experience during the intervention, as you would say in psychology, or essentially the exposure to the ad. And the tool that we're going to use for that is called sentient expression. And it leverages webcams, it's globally scaled, and it measures expressive behavior in the face and in the body while people are engaging with different kinds of content. In this case, it's while they're watching an ad. We're going to measure the expressions on their face and be able to understand whether they're experiencing something positive or negative. But importantly, since we have these two tools together, you're able to look at change in the non-conscious mind, split your data, and cut your emotional data by the change. And that allows you to see which moments of your ad are related to the changes in the non-conscious mind that you desire, that you intend, and those that you don't desire, that you may not intend. So we're going to start here with Facebook, Born in Quarantine. This is a 60-second ad, and if you remember that 2x2 quad, this is an ad that is unintentionally reducing a negative implicit bias towards Black women with a positive overall human message. This is about being born in quarantine, and it's an advertisement for the parent support group for Facebook. But you'll see it has the unintended but positive impact socially. Let's just take a look at this ad first so you can see what we're working with.
I was born during a quarantine. I don't remember it, of course, but for my mother, it was a very difficult time. She told me it was just you and me for many months. But she wasn't alone. Everybody tried to do what they could to help. But she was also a very strong person. And then it was over. We came out into a new world, my mother and me. We can get through this. We all have the strength to do it. I'm 100 years old, and you just take care of that little miracle.
Yeah, really touching ad. It's what people typically think of when they think of an emotional ad. But this is just from a brand outcome influence perspective. This is a very effective ad. This is causal change in implicit associations with the brand before, after exposure to the ad. So you can see an index score here above 100 is associated in a positive direction with the brand. Facebook implicitly is more caring, more authentic, more helpful in the non-conscious minds of consumers after a single exposure to that 60-second spot. Really great. It provides that lift after just a single viewing. But I want to ask this question of this audience, and I want this audience to ask this question of the research, insights, and advertising world. What if decreasing implicit racial bias was one of your advertising KPIs? What if we could treat ad testing like other diagnostic testing by collecting scientific evidence rather than opinions of whether an ad actually influences perceptions of other groups of people? On the right-hand side here, you see the sentient prime technology going back to its roots. And instead of brands as primes, it's using faces of people as primes. This is where the technology really began, understanding the positive and negative. In this case, it's inclusivity, us versus them, associations of groups of people. Now imagine that measure as a pre-post change variable in your advertising testing. Here's what it looks like. This is actually difficult to present, but I've presented these kinds of results many times. Remember I said above 100 is a positive association. This is emotional appeal towards Black people before and after exposure to Born in Quarantine. That 88.6 is not easy to look at, but it's actually evidence of the significant negative racial bias towards Black people in the US. But look at that change data. That's causal scientific change data. Less implicit bias towards Black people after a single viewing of Born in Quarantine. You might say, well, why? That doesn't seem like it's focused on reducing bias towards Black people. But let's watch the facial coding data among different groups of people. So I'm going to show you the facial coding data here, and what you're seeing is the percentage of people who are expressing a positive emotion on their face while they're watching this ad. That's going to be that lighter green line that's coming in, and we're going to drop in a couple of points throughout this ad that emphasize the emotional reaction of a couple of key groups of people. One of them is from the brand perspective, is the group of people who feel like Facebook is more authentic after seeing the ad. So we'll look at their emotional response, those people who end up being more positively associating authentic with Facebook. But we'll also look at the people who have reduced implicit bias towards Black women. Where are their emotional responses? What's their emotional experience? Let's take a look and see what we can learn.
I was born during a quarantine. I don't remember it, of course, but for my mother, it was a very difficult time. She told me it was just you and me for many months. But she wasn't alone. Everybody tried to do what they could to help. But she was also a very strong person. And then it was over. We came out into a new world, my mother and me. We can get through this. We all have the strength to do it. I'm 100 years old, and you just take care of that little miracle.
First of all, I want to point out the sensitivity of this facial coding data within this particular platform. This is giving you really good sensitive measures that change depending on the group of people that you're looking at. So for example, if we scrub back here and just take a look at the moment where the people who have a reduced bias towards Black women after watching this ad, what's their emotional experience? Where are their key changes in emotional experience?
She told me
it's right here.
it was just you and me for many months. But
perhaps that's not surprising, but it's really keen insight. If you're Facebook and this is your 60 and you want to reduce it to your 30 and your 15, and one of your KPIs is reducing negative implicit bias, not just good for the brand, but good for people, then don't lose that moment in your cut downs. That's a key moment that's related to a positive outcome in reducing negative implicit bias towards Black women. So let's take it up in another case study. This one is E-Trade. This is an example of someone who is trying to be diverse and trying to be funny while delivering a message about their brand. But they're having, as you're going to see in this, an unintentional social impact with their advertising. This is called buying the dips, buying dips.
First up is this exquisite bowl of French onion dip. I'm going to start the bidding at $5. Thank you, sir. Looking for $6. $6 over there. Do I hear $7? $7 in the front. $7 going once, going twice. Sold to the onion lover in the front row. Next up is lot number 17, a spinach and artichoke dip, beautifully set in a hollowed out loaf of sourdough bread.
Don't get mad, get E-Trade and get more than just trading, investing, banking, guidance.
Bing, it's like a boxing match is about to start. This is interesting. Here's the data on emotional appeal of the brand. You can see E-Trade gets a little bit of a lift there after exposure, but not much. It's not significant. Problematically, though, their competitor gets the lift. TD Ameritrade, significant lift and positive appeal towards that brand after a single viewing of an E-Trade ad. That's a problem. But it actually gets worse for E-Trade as you look at this ad. If you're watching, there's some really important insight here. A single exposure to this ad reduces implicit associations of smart and trusted with the E-Trade brand. So now you're getting some insight as to why it's not actually producing the lift that you would expect, because on key attributes, it's actually producing a decline in implicit attitudes. This is perhaps not surprising when you consider that this ad spends 25 seconds of its 30 depicting people not being smart, and then it pairs the brand with that association forming experience. Not surprisingly, the brand is perceived as less smart after a single viewing of buying the dips. Really keen insight. If you had that insight before you went to market, you probably wouldn't go to market. You'd do a different edit.
First up is this exquisite bowl.
But I want to focus in on the social impact of this particular ad. You can tell that this ad is trying to be inclusive, right? We have lots of different groups, types of people that are being shown in the ad. And this couple here that you see on the screen, the black couple actually wins the auction. They win the French onion dip. But that look, as you're going to see, is actually very important. Here is the change in inclusivity, implicit inclusivity towards Black women after exposure to this ad. That's scientific evidence, significant at a 95% confidence interval, that there is a momentary decline in implicit inclusivity towards Black women after a single viewing of that ad. That's a problem, and it's unintentional. They're not trying to do that, right? So if your advertising is trying to do one thing and you're having this kind of unintentional impact, what measures are going to show you? The measures that matter for this moment are the true implicit measures. You want scientific evidence of whether this actually reinforces or reduces implicit bias.
First up is this exquisite bowl of
and I'm going to cut the data again here, facial coding data, by that change variable. So the dashed line you're going to see is negative emotion expressed by people who end up being more negative towards Black women after watching this ad.
First up is this exquisite bowl of French onion dip. I'm going to start the bidding at $5. Thank you, sir. Looking for $6. $6 over there. Do I hear $7? $7 in the front. $7 going once, going twice. Sold to the onion lover in the front row. Next up is lot number 17, a spinach and artichoke dip, beautifully set in a hollowed out loaf of sourdough bread.
Don't get mad, get E-Trade and get more than just trading. Investing, banking,
Things
guidance.
that you want to look at when you're analyzing facial action coding or other expressive emotional data is you want to look for change. You don't want to look necessarily at the peaks and the valleys, but you want to look at the moments of change. So first of all, again, very reliable. You can see two distinct groups of people here, similar emotional experience, but look at what happens at this key moment. Bam, right there, we see the look of the woman to the right, of the Black woman to the right, and look at the negative response that follows.
Number 17, a spinach and artichoke dip, beautiful.
Among those people who are more negative towards Black women, again, this is unintentional, but it's having a negative impact. And if you had that insight, you could remove that moment from your spot. Last one we want to do is P&G's the look. And this particular spot is a great example of a brand that is going right at implicit bias, trying to tackle it while also benefiting their brand. Here is P&G's the look. let's talk about the look. Let's talk about bias. Here's the data, here's the evidence. A single exposure to the look increases feelings of inclusivity towards Black people, significant.